If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV?
This is SQE TV, the YouTube channel for wannabe solicitors with me, Jonny Hurst. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the expenditure you might not have realised you have to incur in SQE, the hidden costs.
SQE TV.
So, SQE, the hidden costs. Now, before we look at what those costs might be, let's just remind ourselves of the costs that you're likely to incur if you're self-financing your own SQE journey. Now, first of all, there's the cost of preparing for the exams themselves, so an SQE preparation course, or if you're feeling very lucky and maybe taking a bit of a chance along the way, not a course, but just buying some materials and getting ready that way. But we would recommend you do a course in any event. So there's a cost of a preparation course. That's one set of costs, which could be anything from a few £100s for just some basic materials to several £1,000s, in excess of £15,000 for some SQE Masters courses. We know about that already. We've covered it in other videos. So that's one of the costs we know we're going to incur, and the other one, of course, is the cost of the SQE exams themselves. And remember, those are always separate to any course fees that are charged by any provider. Now, the SQE course fees are one thing, as we've said. The SQE exam fees in 2023 to 2024 come to a total of £4,564. So that's a lot of money you're going to have to pay on top of a prep course before you even think about these unseen costs or these hidden costs that you may not have been aware of.
SQE TV.
Over the course of the next few minutes, what we will be covering will be the various different hidden costs that you may not have appreciated you might have to incur during the course of your SQE journey. And you'll also appreciate, once you finish watching this video, that some of these costs are under your control or within your control, others are not. And where they're within your control, obviously there's a choice as to whether or not you incur them, and we'll talk about the pros and cons in each case. Now, looking at each of these potential hidden costs one by one, some of which might seem really obvious, but we do need to explore them in more detail just to explain the extent of what these costs might be. So first of all, there's the cost of resit fees. Secondly, the cost of travelling to and from the assessment venue. Thirdly, accommodation costs near the venue. Fourthly, the cost of inflation. Fifthly, the cost of top-up or revision classes. And finally, the cost of more multiple choice questions, more materials to prepare you for the assessments themselves. So let's look at these one by one. So let's talk about the first of these hidden costs for the SQE, and this is SQE resits. And the reason why this is a really important subject to discuss is because the low pass rates for SQE1, remember they're just over 50%, means that at least 50% of students are going to have a resit some way down the line, bearing in mind they have to pass SQE2 as well. So the first sit cost for both SQE1 and SQE2 comes to a total of £4,564, but that means probably at least 50% of students are paying a lot more than that because they're going to have at least one resit. Now, what happens if you do a resit of SQE1? That means you have to pay the whole of the resit or the whole of the fee again. That's the whole of £1,798 again if you fail both FLK papers. But if you pass one of them, then your resit fee would be half the fee, which is £899, but still £899 more than the £1,798 for your first sit. So that's quite a hefty additional sum to pay on its own. And then you've got SQE2, which costs £2,766. But if you fail it, you have to pay the same fee again. There's no way you can bank part of the SQE2 mark. It doesn't work like SQE1. It's an all or nothing assessment. So you fail SQE2, you pay £2,766 again. So do bear in mind the fact that you're likely to incur, at least 50% of students are likely to incur resit costs. And bearing in mind the fact that students with first class honours, about 27% fail SQE1 first time, you've got to really take into account that whatever your academic record, there's a strong possibility that you may have to incur additional costs. You'll need to budget for it, and therefore that's why we're being really honest about it in this video. When we look at part 2 of the video, we'll look at the different proportions of students that will need to resit and what their costs overall will be, just to give you a flavour of what the likely exposure might be if you have to do resits. But we'll explore that in more detail in part 2.
SQE TV.
Now let's have a look at the next two hidden costs together. And for some people they may not be hidden costs at all, but let's just talk about them. First of all, it's the cost of travelling to and from the assessment venue. and secondly, it's the cost of accommodation near the assessment venue. Now, of course, if you're somebody who lives near a Pearson Test Centre where you're going to take your SQE1 assessments, or if you live near where the SQE2 assessments are going to be held in London or in Cardiff or in Manchester and soon to be in Birmingham, if you live near those venues, then travelling to and from those venues and accommodation really isn't going to be an issue. But if you're going to have to travel internationally, or you're going to have to travel intercity within the UK, you're going to have to factor in more travel costs and certainly some accommodation costs, because we definitely recommend that you are in the relevant city on the day and the previous day of the assessment, so that you don't have to rely upon transport arriving at a particular time for you to dash across town to get to the venue in time. So these additional costs could be quite considerable, particularly the accommodation costs, because when it comes to SQE1 you've got 2 days of assessments, and when it comes to SQE2 you have 5 days worth of assessments. So that's a lot of accommodation you might have to take into account if, as we recommend, you are in the city on the day before the assessments take place. The next hidden cost to take into account is inflation, and that's in particular in relation to the cost of the assessment fees themselves. Why? Well, it came as a nasty shock to a lot of people that the assessment fees went up by 11% for those students who are going to be sitting in the academic year 2023 to 2024. So if they go up by a similar amount again in the next year, which easily they could do, they could go up from £4,564 to over £5,000. If that is the case, then obviously that's several £100s more that you need to plan in the whole of your budgeting.
SQE TV.
So let's talk about the final 2 extra costs that you might incur, but we would hope that you don't during your journey. The reason why I say this is that if you choose to go and do preparation courses at a reputable provider that are really comprehensive, in-depth courses that last longer than some of the quick test prep courses, the materials they give you and all the practice questions they give you should be enough to get you through the assessment. And buying additional materials, going to additional revision classes that are put on by somebody else could be a waste of money. You could get confused by having things explained in a slightly different way. But also what could happen is you're just shelling out money just to see the same things again, which you've already paid for once if you've gone to a reputable provider who've given you a comprehensive course. Yes, I do understand that preparing for multiple choice questions for SQE1, it's great to have as much practice as possible, but those reputable providers put on thousands of MCQs practice. That should be enough. And what you've got to remember is for the MCQs for SQE1, there's never going to be an MCQ out there for every single question that could come up in the exam.
SQE TV.
So that was SQE, the hidden costs. I hope you got a lot out of this video. Just to remind you, we covered SQE resit fees. We're going to be focusing on that in a lot more detail by giving you some case studies in part 2 of this video, so look out for that soon. Just to remind you, we also covered the costs of travel expenses to and from the exam venues and accommodation near the venue. If that affects you, hopefully you've marked that up in your budget as well. We looked into the effect of inflation, particularly in relation to exam fees, and whether or not you should be doing top-up revision classes or buying more materials or more multiple choice questions. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out the SQE hidden costs part 2 video that focuses on SQE resit fees. Please do like, subscribe, and also comment on this channel, share it with your friends, and it just remains for me to say one more time, here is the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE?